A crumbling invitation. The envelope felt heavy in Martha's hands, heavier than it should have been for a single sheet of parchment. It was addressed to her in elegant, swirling script, the ink a deep, uncompromising black. Martha Crumb, it read, followed by her humble address on Primrose Lane. She turned it over, her fingers tracing the embossed seal, a rampant lion clutching a laurel wreath. Sterling and Sons, attorneys at law. A chill prickled her skin. Mr. Sterling had been a regular at her bakery, the kindest sort of man, always with a twinkle in his eye and a compliment for her pastries. He'd passed away only a week ago. She hadn't expected this. With trembling fingers, she sliced open the envelope and unfolded the stiff parchment. The formal language swam before her eyes. Something about the last will and testament of the late Mr. Alastair Sterling. Something about being required to attend a reading. A date, a time, and the address, Sterling Manor. Martha sank into her worn armchair, the invitation clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Sterling Manor, the grand estate that loomed over the town, a monument to wealth and privilege. What on earth would Mr. Sterling want with her there? The day of the reading dawned gray and drizzly, mirroring the knot of anxiety in Martha's stomach. She'd spent the better part of the previous evening agonizing over what to wear. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of practical, flour-dusted dresses and aprons. Nothing seemed suitable for a gathering at Sterling Manor. Finally, after much deliberation, she settled on a simple, navy blue dress, the one she wore to church on special occasions. It was plain but neat, and she paired it with her mother's pearl necklace, a small touch of elegance that she hoped wouldn't seem too out of place. She brushed her hair until it shone, trying to smooth away the nervous frizz, and dabbed a bit of rosewater perfume on her wrists, a rare indulgence. As she walked towards the bus stop, the invitation tucked securely in her purse, she felt a growing sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was intruding, a small sparrow daring to fly into an eagle's nest. The bus ride was a blur of anxious thoughts and whispered prayers. When she finally stepped off at the foot of the long, winding driveway leading to Sterling Manor, she felt a jolt of intimidation. The wrought iron gates were imposing, the stone pillars flanking them adorned with the same rampant lion she'd seen on the invitation. Taking a deep breath, Martha started her ascent. The driveway seemed to stretch on forever, the manicured lawns on either side vast and perfectly symmetrical. Ancient oak trees lined the path, their branches gnarled and reaching like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Finally, the manor came into view, and Martha gasped. It was even more magnificent and more daunting than she had imagined. A sprawling stone edifice, its windows glinting like cold eyes. Towers and turrets pierced the sky, and gargoyles leered down from the roof, their stone faces frozen in perpetual scowls. A uniformed chauffeur stood by the massive front doors, his expression impassive as she approached. He raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow as she drew near. "Miss Crumb?" he inquired, his voice clipped and formal. "Yes," Martha mumbled, feeling her cheeks flush. He nodded curtly and gestured towards the open doors. "Please proceed. The reading will commence shortly." Martha stepped inside, and the grandeur of the entrance hall stole her breath away. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, its light reflecting off the polished marble floor. Portraits of stern-faced men and women in elaborate gowns lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. Several people were already gathered in the hall, dressed in somber black. They were all impeccably groomed and exuded an air of wealth and sophistication that made Martha feel acutely aware of her own ordinariness. She recognized a few faces from town: Mr. Abernathy, the bank manager, Mrs. Hawthorne, the mayor's wife, but they didn't seem to notice her, or perhaps they simply chose to ignore her. She felt utterly out of place, a smudge of flour on a pristine tablecloth. Clutching her purse tightly, she edged her way towards a corner, hoping to blend into the shadows. She was sure there had been a mistake. She didn't belong here, amidst the Sterling family and their associates. Why would Mr. Sterling, a man of such standing, leave anything to a simple baker like her? The only answer she could come up with was that the invitation had been sent to the wrong Martha Crumb. Whispers and silk. Mr. Grimshaw, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the solemnity of legal matters, cleared his throat. The sound, amplified in the oppressive stillness of the drawing room, made Martha jump. She clutched her worn handbag tighter, the familiar texture of the leather a small comfort in the sea of polished surfaces and icy stairs. "We are gathered here today," Mr. Grimshaw began, his voice a dry rasp, "for the reading of the last will and testament of the late Mr. Alistair Sterling." A collective sigh rippled through the room. It wasn't a sigh of grief, Martha noted, but rather one of anticipation, like children waiting for presents. The Sterling family, a cluster of impeccably dressed individuals, sat perched on the edges of their antique chairs. Their eyes, sharp and assessing, darted around the room, landing briefly and dismissively on Martha before moving on. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny spotlight on Martha's plain wool dress. She felt like a smudge on a pristine canvas. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and simmering impatience. Mr. Grimshaw adjusted his spectacles and began to read, his voice droning on about assets and trusts, clauses and codicils. Martha understood very little of it, but she could sense the growing tension in the room. The Sterlings shifted in their seats, their expressions hardening with each passing sentence. Penelope Sterling Richards, a woman whose very presence seemed to exude wealth and privilege, leaned forward, her diamond earrings glittering like shards of ice. Her gaze, when it flickered over to Martha, was glacial. It spoke volumes without uttering a single word. What is she doing here? She clearly doesn't belong. Martha tried to make herself smaller, tucking her hands into her lap. The heat of the room, combined with her anxiety, made her forehead prickle with sweat. She longed to disappear, to be swallowed up by the plush carpet and forgotten. Mr. Grimshaw continued to read, his voice unwavering, but the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly brittle. The Sterlings exchanged subtle glances, whispers rippling beneath the surface of his pronouncements. Martha caught snippets, disgraceful, utterly absurd, surely a mistake. Penelope, unable to contain herself any longer, let out a delicate, yet pointed cough. "Forgive me, Mr. Grimshaw," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "but is there a reason we're all being subjected to this charade? I fail to see how a baker could possibly be relevant to my father's will." The words hung in the air, each syllable laced with venom. The other Sterlings murmured their agreement, their eyes fixed on Martha with undisguised disdain. She felt a blush creep up her neck, staining her cheeks a fiery red. Mr. Grimshaw paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. He seemed unfazed by Penelope's outburst. "Mrs. Sterling Richards," he said, his voice still measured, "I assure you, I am simply following the instructions outlined in Mr. Sterling's will. If you would allow me to continue." Penelope's lips tightened into a thin line. She settled back in her chair, but her eyes remained fixed on Martha, radiating pure animosity. "By all means," she said, her voice brittle, "but I expect a reasonable explanation for this intrusion." Mr. Grimshaw cleared his throat again and returned to the document. He read on, his voice a steady drone, but Martha could barely focus. Penelope's words echoed in her head, each syllable a tiny hammer blow. She was an intruder, an outsider, a nobody in a room full of somebodies. She should never have come. The will reading seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Each clause, each bequest, each mention of the Sterling family's vast fortune felt like another nail being hammered into her coffin of self-doubt. Finally, Mr. Grimshaw reached the end. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the assembled Sterlings. A hush fell over the room, thicker and more oppressive than before. "And now," he said, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, "we come to the final clause. Mr. Sterling stipulated that the bulk of his estate, including Sterling Manor, the sterling trust, and all associated assets be bequeathed to. He paused, allowing the tension to build. Martha held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Penelope sat forward, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. 2. Mrs. Martha Crumb. Small fortunes, growing discontent. Mr. Grimshaw cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the sudden silence that had fallen over the sterling drawing room. He adjusted his spectacles, the gold frames glinting under the chandelier's light. To my niece, Penelope Sterling Richards, he began, his voice regaining its formal tone, I bequeath the sum of £25,000 to be used at her discretion. A collective sigh, more of disappointment than relief, rippled through the room. Penelope, perched on the edge of a velvet chaise lounge, barely acknowledged the bequest. 25,000 was a pittance, a rounding error in her already substantial portfolio. She'd spent more than that on a single handbag last month. Still, she forced a tight smile. How very generous, she said, the word dripping with insincerity. Grimshaw continued, unfazed. To my nephew, Cecil Sterling, I leave my collection of antique maps, as well as the sum of £10,000. Cecil, a man whose face perpetually wore a look of bewildered impatience, shifted uncomfortably. Maps? 10,000? He'd hoped for something tangible, something that could actually alleviate his rather precarious financial situation. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the gesture revealing a patch of scalp reddened with irritation. Small bequests continued to trickle out. A modest sum to Aunt Mildred for her continued devotion to the family archives. A set of antique silver cutlery to Cousin Edgar, whose culinary skills extended only to boiling an egg. Each pronouncement was met with diminishing enthusiasm, the air growing thick with unspoken resentment. Aunt Mildred's devotion to the family archives consisted of napping amongst dusty boxes. Finally, Mr. Grimshaw paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled sterlings. And now, he said, a deliberate emphasis in his voice, we come to the matter of the residuary estate. He paused again, letting the words hang in the air. Penelope could feel her pulse quicken. The residuary estate, the bulk of Alistair's fortune, the sprawling manor house, the investments, the stocks, the art collection, it all hinged on this. She glanced at Martha, who sat quietly in the corner, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression unreadable. The audacity of that woman, sitting there as if she belonged. Cecil, unable to contain himself any longer, leaned towards Penelope. 25,000? He hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. That's all you got? I got bloody maps. Maps, Penelope. I can't eat maps. Penelope shot him a venomous look. Control yourself, Cecil, she snapped. This isn't the time for a tantrum. Though she understood his frustration, it was as if Alistair was mocking them all from beyond the grave. But what's going on? Cecil persisted, his voice rising in pitch. Who gets the rest? Surely it can't be her. He gestured towards Martha with a disdainful flick of his wrist. Penelope's lips tightened into a thin line. It's preposterous, of course. Some clerical error, no doubt. Grimshaw is simply drawing out the drama. But what if it isn't? Cecil wrung his hands. What if she actually inherits everything? What'll we do then? The question hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud of uncertainty settling over the Sterlings. They looked at each other, a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror in their eyes. The thought of Martha, the outsider, the baker, inheriting their birthright was simply too much to bear. Aunt Mildred, roused from her near slumber by the rising tension, piped up in a surprisingly loud voice. Perhaps Alistair finally lost his mind. All those late nights, poring over ledgers, it must have addled his brain. Edgar, still clutching his antique cutlery, nodded in agreement. He always was a bit eccentric, even as a boy. Remember the time he tried to build a flying machine out of umbrellas and cheese graters? Penelope ignored them, her mind racing. There had to be a way to contest the will. Some loophole, some technicality, something, anything, to prevent that woman from getting her hands on the sterling fortune. She fixed her gaze on Mr. Grimshaw, a cold determination hardening her features. The game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The woman who brought joy. Mr. Grimshaw cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the oppressive silence in the room. He adjusted his spectacles, the lenses glinting in the weak afternoon light filtering through the heavy drapes. "There is a codicil," he announced, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of Sterling Manor. A collective gasp swept through the room. Penelope, who had been nursing a glass of sherry with thinly veiled disdain, nearly choked. Cecil, slumped in his chair, straightened up, his eyes suddenly alert. Martha, still feeling as though she were intruding on a private wake, clutched her small handbag tighter. "This codicil," Mr. Grimshaw continued, his gaze sweeping over the assembled family, "stipulates that the bulk of Mr. Sterling's estate, including Sterling Manor and its associated fortune, shall be bequeathed to the woman who brought joy to Archibald's final years." The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched, taut and thick, broken only by the frantic thumping of Martha's own heart. Her face flushed crimson. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the threadbare Persian rug beneath her feet. Then the murmurs began. Low at first, like the rustling of leaves, they quickly grew into a cacophony of whispers and hushed pronouncements. Joy? What joy? Who could he possibly be referring to? It must be a mistake. Penelope, however, was radiating confidence. She smoothed down the skirt of her severe navy dress, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She caught Cecil's eye and raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. He blinked back at her, confusion etched on his face. "Clearly," Penelope announced, her voice cutting through the rising tide of speculation, "Uncle Alastair was referring to me." Several heads swiveled in her direction. "After Mother passed," she continued, her tone laced with practiced sorrow, "I made it my duty to visit him regularly, to read to him, to listen to his ramblings. I brought him comfort in his declining years. Who else could possibly lay claim to having brought him joy?" Cecil, never one to miss an opportunity, chimed in. "Penelope is right. She was the only one who truly cared about the old man, always fussing over him, bringing him little gifts." He trailed off, searching for a suitably sentimental detail. "Marmalade? Yes, she always brought a marmalade." Mr. Grimshaw remained impassive, a statue of legal rectitude. He adjusted his spectacles again, a gesture that seemed to indicate a lack of agreement with Penelope's pronouncements. Martha, meanwhile, felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She couldn't breathe. The air in the room seemed to have grown thick and heavy, pressing down on her chest. She was an outsider, a nobody, caught in the crossfire of a family drama she didn't understand. Joy. She hadn't brought Archibald Sterling joy. She had simply cared for him. Penelope, emboldened by Cecil's support, rose to her feet. She surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her relatives, each one etched with varying degrees of envy and disbelief. "Well," she declared, her voice ringing with triumph, "I believe that settles it. Unless anyone else wishes to make a preposterous claim." She paused, her eyes narrowed, daring anyone to challenge her. Silence. "Excellent." She turned to Mr. Grimshaw, her smile now radiant. "I assume the paperwork can be finalized immediately?" Mr. Grimshaw cleared his throat once more. "Not quite, Mrs. Sterling Richards." He paused, drawing out the moment, a hint of something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "The codicil also stipulates that the determination of who brought Mr. Sterling joy is to be made by Mr. Sterling's personal physician, Dr. Albright." Penelope's smile faltered just slightly. Dr. Albright? But he barely knew Uncle Alastair. "He was his physician for many years, Mrs. Sterling Richards," Mr. Grimshaw said, his voice carefully neutral. And Mr. Sterling clearly trusted his judgment. A new wave of murmurs erupted. Dr. Albright, a new player in this bizarre game. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch, the air thick with anticipation and simmering resentment. All eyes turned toward Martha, who remained frozen in her chair, a silent observer in a drama that was rapidly spiraling out of control. Blueberry secrets. The aroma of yeast and sun-ripened fruit was as familiar as her own heartbeat. Long before the Sterling will cast a shadow over her life, before Penelope's icy glares, even before Archibald Sterling became a name, there were the blueberries. Each Tuesday unfolded similarly. The bakery's gentle thrum, the percussion of stainless steel, and the vibrant indigo staining her hands as she coaxed the berries into the batter. Not just any blueberries, mind you. These were wild Maine jewels, tiny explosions of concentrated flavor that left a joyful residue on fingertips and palate. Farmer McGregor, a curmudgeon with a heart of gold, procured them from secret, sun-drenched glades. Each muffin was a miniature triumph, born of patience and dedication. She lavished butter on them, allowed them ample time to rise, and coaxed them to a perfect golden hue, achieving a tender, yielding crumb. It began subtly, with a handwritten query tucked into a sterling foundation order. Perhaps a small batch of blueberry muffins? Old family recipe misplaced. The script wavered, the ink faded with age. Intrigued, Martha dispatched a dozen, adding a few extras out of generosity. The following week, the request returned. And the week after, too. Soon, it solidified into a regular ritual, a bright spot in her Tuesday routine. Eventually, a different missive arrived. An invitation. Mr. Sterling wishes to express his gratitude for the muffins. Would you consider delivering them personally this Tuesday at 3 p.m.? Sterling Manor possessed a grandeur that dwarfed her expectations. The gates, crafted from wrought iron, resembled menacing teeth, and the seemingly endless driveway threatened to swallow her humble delivery van. Clutching the warm tin, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, she felt profoundly out of place. A butler, ramrod straight in his formal attire, escorted her through echoing halls adorned with portraits of severe-looking ancestors. The atmosphere was redolent with the scent of beeswax and generations of wealth. Finally, she found herself in a bright conservatory, where an older gentleman sat in a wicker chair, a book lying forgotten on his lap. Archibald Sterling was smaller than anticipated, almost fragile. Yet his eyes, a startling cerulean, glimmered with keen intelligence. He greeted her with a warm smile, a surprising contrast to his imposing surroundings. "Miss Crumb, I presume?" His voice, a gentle rasp, was kind. "Thank you for coming. And, more importantly, thank you for the muffins." Their initial conversation revolved around blueberries, the ephemeral nature of summer, the solace found in simple joys. He reminisced about childhood summers in Maine, picking berries alongside his grandmother. Martha, in turn, divulged her baking secrets, her passion for crafting treats that sparked happiness. The muffins became a conduit, bridging their disparate worlds. Each Tuesday, Martha arrived at Sterling Manor, bearing not just muffins, but a sliver of normalcy, a reminder of the sweetness life could still offer. She would sit with Mr. Sterling amidst the jasmine-scented air of the conservatory. He shared tales of his travels, his business dealings, his regrets. She listened, offering a comforting presence, a non-judgmental ear. He never intruded into her personal life, never inquired about her struggles. He simply cherished her company, the warmth she brought into his solitary existence. She recalled one particular Tuesday. Mr. Sterling appeared unusually subdued, his customary vivacity diminished. He sampled a muffin, closed his eyes, and a genuine smile illuminated his face. "These," he murmured, "are the most delightful things I've tasted in ages. They evoke happiness." He never explicitly stated it, but Martha detected a deep melancholy beneath his aristocratic veneer, a loneliness that echoed her own quiet existence. The muffins, she realized, were more than mere confectionaries. They represented connection, a small act of kindness that had blossomed into an unexpected friendship. Now, within the lavish drawing room, under the scrutiny of the Sterling family's hostile stares, the memory of that smile felt like a delicate defense. The blueberry formula, once a source of quiet contentment, now weighed upon her like a secret she wished she didn't have, a key to a door she had no desire to unlock. The baker inherits. The air in the Sterling library crackled with unspoken animosity. Sunlight strained through the tall, leaded windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the stagnant air. Mr. Grimshaw, the family solicitor, cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the oppressive silence. He adjusted his spectacles, the lenses glinting. He held a sheaf of papers, the will of Alastair Sterling, a document about to shatter the carefully constructed world of the Sterling family. Now, he began, his voice betraying a slight tremor, to the matter of the primary beneficiary. He paused, a dramatic beat that stretched into an unbearable eternity. Penelope Sterling Richards straightened her back, a predatory gleam in her eyes. She had always considered herself Alastair's natural successor, the one who understood his vision, his grandeur. "The will stipulates," Mr. Grimshaw continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled faces, "that the primary beneficiary must fulfill a very specific description." He shuffled the papers, a thin smile playing on his lips. "The beneficiary is described as a woman, unconnected by blood, of simple means, and possessing—" He paused again, drawing out the suspense, "an extraordinary talent for baking. Specifically, a baker of exceptional blueberry muffins." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Penelope's carefully constructed facade of composure crumbled. Her mouth tightened into a thin, disapproving line. Across the room, Charles Sterling, Alastair's nephew, sputtered into his brandy. Even Beatrice, Alastair's stoic sister, looked momentarily taken aback, her expression betraying a flicker of surprise before settling back into its usual mask of icy indifference. Martha, who had been trying to blend into the mahogany paneling, felt her heart leap into her throat. She had come, as requested, a courtesy to a man she had considered a friend. Never, in her wildest dreams, had she imagined this. Muffins? Her muffins? Mr. Grimshaw peered over his spectacles, his gaze settling on Martha. "Is there a Martha Crumb present?" The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to her, each pair a sharp, assessing blade. Penelope's gaze held undisguised contempt. Charles's was one of bewildered anger, while Beatrice's remained inscrutable. Martha felt a flush creep up her neck. She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. She hadn't said a word since arriving, acutely aware of the palpable disdain directed her way. Slowly, hesitantly, she raised her hand. I'm Martha Crumb," she whispered, the words barely audible. Mr. Grimshaw nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. "Indeed, it seems you match the description perfectly, Miss Crumb." A wave of murmurs erupted from the Sterling family. "Impossible!" Penelope hissed, her voice laced with venom. "There must be some mistake. Blueberry muffins?" Charles scoffed, sloshing brandy onto his immaculate suit. "He's leaving his entire fortune to someone who bakes blueberry muffins?" Beatrice remained silent, her eyes narrowed, studying Martha with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Mr. Grimshaw raised his hand, silencing the uproar. "The will is quite clear, and I assure you, it has been thoroughly examined. Unless there is evidence of undue influence." He paused, his gaze lingering pointedly on Martha. Martha felt a surge of panic. Undue influence? She had simply brought Mr. Sterling muffins, shared stories, and listened to his reminiscences. She had enjoyed his company, his kindness. It had been a genuine friendship, a lifeline for both of them. But now it was being twisted, contorted into something ugly and mercenary. But this is absurd," Penelope exclaimed, her voice rising in pitch. "Alastair would never." Mr. Grimshaw cleared his throat again. "The terms of the will are legally binding, Mrs. Sterling Richards. Unless contested, the estate, with the exception of several minor bequests, will pass to Miss Crumb." The room swam. The faces of the Sterling family, contorted with disbelief and anger, blurred before her eyes. The weight of their collective resentment pressed down on her, suffocating her. The grand library, with its towering bookshelves and priceless artifacts, suddenly felt like a cage. Martha stumbled back, her hand reaching out to steady herself against a nearby table. The mahogany felt cold and unfamiliar beneath her trembling fingers. The scent of old books and beeswax polish, usually so comforting, now seemed to mock her. She, Martha Crumb, baker of blueberry muffins, was about to inherit the sterling fortune? It was ludicrous, incomprehensible. A mistake, surely. Any moment, someone would realize the error, and she could retreat back to her quiet life, her small bakery, her simple existence. But deep down, a sliver of dread whispered that this was no mistake. Her life had irrevocably changed, and the Sterling family, with their simmering resentment and their vast resources, were not about to let her have it without a fight. A crumbling claim. This is preposterous. Cecil Sterling's voice cracked like brittle china, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent room. He slammed a fist on the mahogany table, causing a silver picture frame to wobble precariously. Penelope Sterling Richards, her face a mask of controlled fury, subtly righted it. The air, thick with unspoken resentment, felt heavy enough to suffocate Martha. "Cecil, please," Penelope hissed, though her eyes never left Martha, pinning her like a specimen under glass. Cecil ignored her. He rounded on Mr. Abernathy, the family solicitor, who looked ashen under the weight of the moment. "You're telling me, Abernathy, that my uncle, in his right mind, left the bulk of his estate to a muffin maker?" He spat the last two words like a curse. Abernathy cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "The will is quite clear, Mr. Sterling. Ms. Crumb is named as the primary beneficiary." Martha, perched on the edge of an antique chair that felt as unforgiving as the Sterling's gazes, felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She hadn't touched the water Abernathy had offered, suddenly fearing it was poisoned. Not literally, of course, but with the venomous intent radiating from the family. This is an outrage. Cecil's face was now the color of overripe plums. He must have been addled, or manipulated. This woman, he gestured wildly in Martha's direction. She must have taken advantage of him. The word manipulated hung in the air, sharp and accusing. Martha's breath hitched. She had never manipulated anyone in her life, unless one counted subtly angling for the best peaches at the farmer's market. Penelope finally spoke, her voice smooth as silk, but laced with steel. "Really, Cecil, your volume isn't helping. Let's be reasonable. Mr. Abernathy, surely there are grounds to contest this document." She avoided saying "will," as if the word itself was tainted. Abernathy sighed, a sound like rustling parchment. "There are always grounds to contest a will, Mrs. Sterling Richards. However, challenging it successfully, that is another matter entirely. We would need to demonstrate undue influence, lack of capacity, or fraud." He glanced at Martha, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Martha found her voice, small and trembling. I never manipulated Mr. Sterling. He was a kind man. A lonely man." "Lonely?" Cecil scoffed. "My uncle? Surrounded by family, friends, business associates. Family who only came around when they wanted something," Martha blurted, then immediately regretted her boldness. The Sterling's glares intensified. "How dare you?" Penelope's composure cracked, a fissure appearing in her perfect facade. "You know nothing about our family." Martha shrank back. "Only meant I brought him muffins. Blueberry muffins. He liked them." Her voice trailed off, sounding pathetic even to her own ears. "Muffins?" Cecil's laughter was harsh and humorless. "So, you bribed him with muffins? Is that what you're suggesting?" "I didn't bribe him," Martha protested, heat rising in her cheeks. He enjoyed them. I like to bake. It makes people happy. I thought he looked sad, so I brought him some muffins. That's all." Penelope raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "And this baking out of the goodness of your heart, led to him leaving you a fortune? I find that rather convenient, don't you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Martha could feel her face burning under their collective scrutiny. She wanted to disappear, to evaporate into the plush carpet and be swallowed whole. She was just a baker. A simple baker who made blueberry muffins. How had she ended up in this nightmare? Abernathy cleared his throat again, breaking the tension, albeit slightly. Perhaps we should adjourn for today. Mrs. Sterling Richards, Mr. Sterling, I will be in touch to discuss potential avenues for challenging the will. Ms. Crumb. He turned to Martha, his expression carefully neutral. You will be hearing from me as well. As the Sterlings swept out of the room, their disdain palpable, Martha felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She was alone now, well and truly alone, facing a battle she never asked for, armed only with a recipe for blueberry muffins and a crumbling claim to a fortune she didn't want. Letters of gratitude. Silence draped the room like a shroud, heavier even than the antique furniture, as Mr. Grimshaw prepared to speak. He adjusted his spectacles, the magnified lenses lending gravity to his expression. There is also a letter. From the depths of a manila folder, he produced a cream-colored envelope, the paper whispering secrets of age in the stillness. The Sterling family portraits, hung high on the walls, seemed to observe with a detached scrutiny. Martha's pulse quickened. She clutched the worn handle of her handbag, finding solace in its familiar texture amidst the unfamiliar luxury. She felt the weight of the Sterlings' collective gaze, a palpable force. With painstaking care, Mr. Grimshaw unfolded the letter. A faint fragrance of sandalwood arose from the time-worn paper, a ghostly echo of Archibald Sterling's presence. He began to read, his voice even and careful, yet imbued somehow with the echo of the deceased patriarch's spirit. To whom it may concern, and especially to Martha Crumb, he began, the words hanging in the air. If you're reading this, it means I've finally kicked the bucket, as the bard so charmingly put it. More importantly, it means my wishes regarding my estate are under scrutiny. A rustle moved through the room as agitation stirred. Penelope Sterling Richards's nostrils flared subtly, a mere flicker betraying her tightly leashed fury. Mr. Grimshaw continued, I've lived a long life, one of privilege, and, truth be told, a good deal of disappointment. My family has always been present, yet their attention often felt more obligatory than freely given, driven by duty rather than authentic affection. Never once did they bring me blueberry muffins just because they thought I might like them. Martha's cheeks bloomed with a sudden heat. She yearned to vanish, to disappear into the intricate weave of the Persian rug. The lawyer paused, his gaze lingering over the assembled Sterlings. Martha Crumb, a woman marked by uncommon grace and sincere kindness, entered my life unexpectedly. She asked nothing of me, offering only the warmth of her smile and the simple joy of companionship. In her, I rediscovered a connection I believed irrevocably lost, a true human bond, free from demands or hidden motives. He adjusted his glasses once more, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner now amplified in the quiet. My family, I anticipate, will challenge this decision. They will claim I was addled, or that Martha somehow manipulated me. Let me assure you, my mind was as clear as it has ever been, and deceit is foreign to Martha's nature. She possesses a rare and precious integrity. Penelope shifted, her perfectly styled hair remaining undisturbed. Her eyes, however, were like glacial shards. I've ensured my family's well-being throughout my life. They want for nothing. They will continue to want for nothing. This bequest, however, is not about financial need. It is about gratitude. It is about recognizing the simple acts of kindness that illuminated my final years. A testament to the fact that often the most valuable treasures reside not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday moments of human connection. Mr. Grimshaw's voice softened as he approached the concluding lines. To Martha, I bequeath my estate, not as a reward, but as an expression of heartfelt appreciation. I trust she will use it to continue spreading her generosity, to bake her delightful muffins, and to lead a life rich with happiness. And to my family, I offer this, Instead of dwelling on what you believe is your due, perhaps consider learning from the woman who showed me the meaning of true benevolence." He folded the letter, the finality echoing through the room. Martha was beyond words, tears blurring her vision. She hadn't understood the depth of Mr. Sterling's sentiment, the impact her simple actions had wrought. She had simply been herself. The Sterlings presented a portrait of smoldering resentment. Cecil's face flushed crimson, his hands balled into tight fists. Bartholomew stared straight ahead, seemingly lost in his own grim calculations. Eleanor dabbed delicately at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her sorrow either heartfelt or performative. Martha couldn't discern. Penelope, however, remained the epitome of composure. But cracks were showing in the facade. A vein throbbed visibly in her temple, and her lips were compressed into a bloodless line. The color had leached from her face, leaving her skin almost translucent. Clearly, the letter, with its glimpse into Archibald's tender feelings for Martha, had struck a painful chord. The depth of the friendship, the implication that a simple baker understood him in ways his own family never had, was a wound far deeper than the loss of inheritance. She finally spoke, her voice a low, dangerous murmur. "This changes nothing. We will investigate every legal possibility. This letter proves nothing. It merely reveals the extent of her influence." A faint sneer curled her lips as she spat the word influence. She rose, her movements precise and sharp. "Come, family. We have much to discuss." With a final, withering glance directed at Martha, Penelope glided from the room, the remaining Sterlings following like dutiful shadows. The lingering scent of expensive perfume hung in the air, a suffocating reminder of the battle now launched. Sweet revenge. The weight of inheritance descended upon Martha, a mantle of unexpected gold. Archibald Sterling's testament, his very voice echoing in her memory, felt simultaneously dreamlike and profoundly tangible. No longer simply Martha Crumb, purveyor of slightly over-toasted almond croissants and rescuer of forlorn felines. She was now affluent. The initial days seeded to a burgeoning awareness, a sensation akin to emerging from decades of muted existence. She wouldn't be frivolous, that, she vowed. Archibald hadn't bestowed this gift for her to become a dilettante. He cherished her empathy, her honest effort. She would honor that legacy, beginning with Crumb's Corner, her beloved bakery. Yet the place showed its age. The oven coughed more than it heated, the display cases were marred, and the wallpaper peeled like flaking paint. She pictured cutting-edge ovens gleaming, marble surfaces cool and smooth, and an inviting reading area with plush seating. A space with a comforting scent of baked goods mingled with the aroma of aged paper. Energized by anticipation, Martha contacted Mr. Abernathy the next morning, a portly contractor whose kind eyes sparkled amidst the dust of his trade. Describing her vision, her voice wavered at the boldness of her aspirations, while Abernathy listened, his pencil sketching calculations on a notepad. He promised blueprints, considerate of her funds. Funds she suspected were now far more substantial than he imagined. While Abernathy drafted designs, Martha shifted her focus to the neighborhood. She'd long nurtured the idea of free baking workshops for disadvantaged youth, imparting a valuable skill, a form of creative expression, empowering them to craft something both beautiful and sustaining. Contacting Mrs. Higgins at the community center, she proposed a weekly program. The director responded with unrestrained enthusiasm. Across town, Penelope Sterling Richards stalked her flawlessly appointed living room, her anger simmering like a scorched reduction. "That commoner," she hissed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Inheriting what was legitimately ours. It's an abomination." Her spouse, Charles, whose chief accomplishment was his marriage to Penelope, offered a clumsy attempt at appeasement. "Darling, the lawyers are confident in our case. Undue influence, they claim." She clearly manipulated Archibald. Penelope whirled, her gaze sharp as flint. "Strong case or not, Charles, That woman will flaunt our fortune. We need to stop this, and I don't mean just in court. A treacherous idea blossomed in her mind. People must witness Martha Crumb's true nature. A greedy, opportunistic serpent. Penelope resolved on a campaign of defamation. Subtly sown seeds of doubt, whispered in strategic ears, could yield spectacular results. She began with Mrs. Gable, the town's principal gossip, whom she coincidentally encountered at the tea room. "Oh, Mrs. Gable," she purred, her tones saccharine. "Have you heard about that baker, Martha Crumb? It appears dear Archibald Sterling took quite a fancy to her. One can only hope she can handle such a considerable estate. I hear she's rather unconventional." She paused, allowing the inference to linger. "And her baking, well, I've certainly tasted better." The renovation of Crumb's Corner commenced with a dramatic clang. The ancient oven, after one final, agonizing shudder, breathed its last, necessitating the demolition of a wall section for its removal. Martha, dusted with grime and beaming with exhilaration, oversaw the pandemonium with newfound resolve. The aroma of lumber and fresh pigment gradually superseded the familiar scent of baking. Martha longed for the soothing rhythm of kneading, the solid thump of a perfectly leavened dough hitting the oven's heart. But it would be worth it. Soon, Crumb's Corner would be more than a bakery. It would be a refuge. Penelope's machinations, however, were gaining momentum. Doubts trailed Martha like unwelcome company. Patrons, previously eager for her fare, now regarded her with suspicion. Some ceased coming entirely. One morning, Martha arrived to discover the bakery window defaced with what appeared to be putrid eggs. A coarse message, daubed in crimson, proclaimed, "Greedy bitch." Her spirit plummeted. The sweetness of her triumph soured. This was no longer solely about money. It was about her standing, her principles, about everything she'd cultivated. Penelope Sterling Richards had struck the initial blow, and Martha realized, with a shiver of certainty, that the conflict had genuinely begun. A baker's legacy. The lingering fragrance of yeast and cinnamon comforted Martha, a welcome salve after the prior week's turmoil. She gazed around the bakery, now nearly doubled in size. Stainless steel ovens, gleaming and immense, stood ready to produce their daily bounty. Sunlight poured through enlarged windows, washing the newly painted walls in a warm, inviting cream. A genuine smile touched her lips as she inhaled deeply. The vandalism had stung, a mean-spirited attack on her dreams. Yet, it had also fortified her spirit. Intimidation was not an option. She wouldn't permit Penelope Sterling Richards or anyone to rob her of her fulfillment. The hiring process had been a swift, exhilarating rush. So many hopeful faces, each bearing a unique story. Elsie Peterson, a widow struggling on a meager pension, now decorated cakes with a remarkably steady hand. Young David, fresh from culinary school, was infatuated with sourdough, his enthusiasm utterly contagious. Maria, a single mother, kneaded dough with quiet fortitude, her eyes reflecting a gratitude that warmed Martha to the core. "Everything all right, Martha?" Elsie's voice was a gentle rasp. Martha turned, offering a sunny smile. "Absolutely perfect, Elsie. More fulfilling than I ever dared hope." "You've earned it, dear," Elsie responded, wiping frosting from her apron. "A kind heart makes for good baking, always." That evening, after the last patron departed and the sweet perfume of sugar and spice still permeated the air, Martha sat at her desk, a stack of invoices before her. The bakery was flourishing beyond expectations. It was time to fulfill another silent promise, one she'd made to herself and to Archibald Sterling. She carefully inscribed a check, a significant portion of the week's earnings, payable to Harmony House Shelter, a local organization offering refuge and assistance to displaced families. She recalled Archibald's unassuming generosity, his history of anonymous donations. He wouldn't want his fortune squandered. He would want it deployed to aid others. The following morning, Martha personally delivered the check to Sister Agnes, whose face shone with benevolence and unwavering conviction. "Martha, this is Truly a godsend, Sister Agnes said, her eyes brimming with thankfulness. We've been struggling to keep our doors open. This will make an immense difference. Martha simply beamed. Mr. Sterling would have wanted it this way. Later, she returned to her familiar rhythm. She measured flour, cracked eggs, and whisked batter, her movements fluid and practiced. In the midst of the day's activity, she made time for her usual delivery to Sunny Meadows' retirement home. Carefully arranging the blueberry muffins in a wicker basket, Archibald came to mind. He had relished those muffins, savoring each morsel with childlike pleasure. She pictured his soft grin, the sparkle in his eyes. "These are for my friends at Sunny Meadows," she mentioned to David, who was shaping croissants with deftness. Mr. Sterling thoroughly enjoyed them. David nodded respectfully. "That's a kind deed, Martha," spreading a little happiness. At Sunny Meadows, the residents eagerly anticipated her arrival. With neatly styled silver hair, Mrs. Gable greeted Martha with a heartfelt hug. Mr. Henderson, his vision dimmed by age, recognized the scent of blueberries, and his face brightened considerably. "Martha, dear, you haven't forgotten us," Mrs. Gable said, her voice slightly tremulous. "Never," Martha responded, presenting her with a warm muffin. "Blueberry, just as you like it." Watching them savor the muffins, their faces glowing with simple delight, Martha felt a deep sense of contentment. This, she realized, was her calling. Not merely baking, but instilling joy, providing solace, and honoring Archibald's memory through acts of kindness. Yet, even amidst the warmth and goodwill, a subtle disquiet lingered. Penelope Sterling Richards' actions cast a long shadow, a persistent reminder that the struggle was far from over. Whispers had begun anew, carried on the breeze like dandelion fluff. Rumors about Martha's past, fueled by envy and animosity. She knew Penelope wouldn't relent. The vandalism was only the opening salvo. Martha braced herself, recognizing that she must fight not only for her own well-being, but for the future she was creating for herself and her employees. The whispers threatened to dismantle everything she had painstakingly built, portraying her as an opportunist, a fortune hunter undeserving of Archibald's generosity. As Martha locked up that night, a flyer plastered on the window caught her eye. It was a grotesque caricature of her, her features twisted and distorted. Below the image, in stark, bold lettering, were the words, "Martha Crumb, a fake." Her heart plummeted. The whispers had become a roar. The campaign to discredit her was escalating rapidly. But as she carefully peeled off the flyer, her resolve solidified. She would not be silenced. She would not be cowed. She would retaliate, not with malice, but with compassion, with generosity, and with an unwavering belief in the power of a simple blueberry muffin to bring a sliver of happiness into the world. She would honor Archibald Sterling's legacy, not merely with his wealth, but with her very soul.